This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. And I think it's safe to say that the whole of King Henry VIII's court, and perhaps most especially that king himself, was fixated on the royal bloodline. After all, much actual blood would be spilt in the quest for a legitimate male heir for Henry's throne. There was a son born out of wedlock but acknowledged. He was Henry Fitzroy, and he would have honours and titles thrust upon him from his very earliest years. Because he was, after all, the proof that Henry VIII was capable of not only making healthy children, but of making sons. Perhaps, though, Fitzroy was an anomaly. Is it possible that Henry had other children who were born out of wedlock who did not find themselves so acknowledged or rewarded? What of his daughter Elizabeth and her cousin, or indeed cousins, on her mother's side? Is it possible they were also her half-siblings? In either case, they were certainly the close kin of one of England's most famous queens, and so I wonder, what were their lives like? Well, today we are going to explore the lives of those two siblings, Katherine Carey, later Lady Knollys, and her brother Henry Cary, later Baron Hunsdon. But before we jump into today's topic, I want to say an absolutely massive thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring another video on this channel. Squarespace has made building, updating and managing my website so easy, and with Squarespace Blueprint, it's even easier. This cutting-edge website design system asks you a few questions and then helps you to create a well-designed and personal website. You can then make changes, any ones that you wish, to fonts, colours, images, etc., all through the Fluid Engine Editor, and that's so simple, it's just drag and drop. I love how easy Squarespace makes it to manage my mailing list, so that I can create and send those weekly update emails to everyone who has signed up via this contact page on my Squarespace site. As I've mentioned before, I love the fact that I can use Squarespace through my desktop or laptop, but also through the app on my phone. From analysing traffic to editing the website itself, this means I can do that from anywhere. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. So whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, to engage with your audience, and to sell anything from products to content to time, all in one place, all on your terms. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/readingthepast to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. But now it's time for us to take a look at what we can discover about the lives of Katherine and Henry Carey. Katherine and Henry Carey were born into a family that was already well versed in courtly intrigue. Back in 1514, their mother, Mary Boleyn, had obtained a place as one of the ladies-in-waiting to King Henry VIII's sister, also called Mary, Mary Tudor for us from now on, so that she might serve her in France, following Mary Tudor's marriage to King Louis XII. Within months, though, the French king was dead, and Mary Tudor was making her way back to England. She would become Duchess of Suffolk on the way through her rather hasty marriage to her brother's best friend, Charles Brandon. Mary Boleyn remained at the French court. During her time there, rumours that were apparently fuelled by her conduct and that focused in particular upon questions regarding her modesty and her chastity would circulate. Before long, she would return to England, and there she would take up a place in the household of Queen Catherine of Aragon. On the 4th of February 1520, Mary married William Carey. He was a respected courtier and a gentleman of the Privy Chamber. William's mother was related to Edmund Beaufort, 1st Duke of Somerset, which meant that King Henry VIII was, therefore, William's distant cousin. Henry was a principal guest at Mary Boleyn and William Carey's wedding, and after the wedding, these newlyweds were given lodgings at court very near to the king. Later on in 1520, it is thought likely that Mary Boleyn accompanied her husband and the rest of the court when they journeyed to France for the Field of Cloth of Gold, and I have made a video about this particular event that I will leave linked. The king made a series of grants to William Carey between 1522 and 1525, and in the midst of these, in 1523, there is a record of a ship being named the Mary Boleyn. By 1528, Mary had had 2 children, who are our subjects for today's video. Katherine Carey was born first, with her brother Henry Cary being born a few years later. And as you may have spotted, both of them are carrying the surname of Mary's husband, William Carey. They are not Fitzroy. But nevertheless, their paternity has long been questioned. Although we don't know precisely when it began, or indeed when it ended, Mary was almost certainly the king's mistress at around the time that one, or perhaps both of her children, were conceived. Henry would acknowledge his relationship with Mary formally in 1528, while he was seeking a dispensation from Pope Clement VII, so that he might marry a woman who was related to himself in, quote, the first degree of affinity, and that could refer to a woman whose sister he had known biblically, so to speak. Because Henry VIII's romantic and indeed marital attentions were now being directed towards Anne Boleyn, and her sister thus became an impediment for them to deal with so that their union might proceed. Later on, it would be reported that Henry had been confronted with the rumour that he had, quote, meddled with both Anne's sister and her mother, to which accusation Henry is said to have responded, quote, never with the mother. And at this point, Thomas Cromwell reportedly interjected with a correction, quote, nor never with the sister either, and therefore put that out of your mind. Make of all of that what you will. Katherine would have this portrait painted. It is dated to 1562, and it records her age as 38, and this places her birth at around 1523 or 1524, which means that she was conceived while Henry VIII was busy making grants to William Carey and naming ships after William's wife and Catherine's mother, Mary. If we accept that Henry VIII and Mary had an affair, then I think we have to assume that Katherine was conceived and born during Mary's relationship with the king. However, her brother Henry was born in the March of 1526, by which time those grants appeared to have stopped, and so perhaps this was after the affair had ended. Jonathan Hughes points out that, quote, the relationship between Henry VIII and Mary Carey was unusual in taking place after, not before, the latter's marriage. Perhaps Henry, who already had an illegitimate son with Elizabeth Blount, thought it safer to risk having children whose paternity could be denied, rather than avowed bastards, whose existence only emphasised his lack of legitimate heirs. In terms of their true paternity, I'm going to confess to being a complete fence-sitter. I think it's very possible that both Katherine and Henry Carey were really the children of King Henry VIII. However, it's equally plausible that they have the correct surname and that they were, in fact, their mother's husband's children, the children of William Carey. In any case, I do think it's worth pointing out that it's Katherine Carey's birth date that makes it more likely that of the two of them, she would have been the royal child. Katherine's early life is glimpsed only in fragments. Alison Weir writes that, quote, for more than a century, a tale has circulated that Mary's daughter, Katherine Carey, was one of the 4 distressed young ladies who attended Anne Boleyn in the Tower during the 4 days after her condemnation and accompanied her to the scaffold. There is no contemporary evidence to support the tale, and surely Katherine, at 12, would have been considered too young for such a grim duty. A little over 3 years after the execution of her aunt, which she may or may not have witnessed, Katherine found herself at court, because in the November of 1539 she became a maid of honour to Henry VIII's new wife, Anne of Cleves. And this appointment is one usually reserved for girls who were 16 or older, which of course does correspond with the details on Katherine's portrait that suggested a birth date of 1523 or 1524. While the marriage of her new royal mistress was foundering, Katherine was busy preparing for her own wedding. On the 26th of April 1540, Katherine Carey, still in her teens, married Francis Knollys. He was a rising courtier. Sally Varlow writes that, quote, according to a note in Francis's Latin dictionary, their first child, Henry, was born the Tuesday before Easter Day. That's the 12th of April, 1541. The inscription near to Catherine's tomb in Westminster Abbey informs us that 15 more children would follow on after the birth of this first one. Catherine was around 10 years older than her cousin and possible half-sister, the future Queen Elizabeth I, and they do appear to have enjoyed an affectionate and enduring relationship, one that likely began in their childhoods. During the reign of the Roman Catholic Queen Mary I, the Protestants, Catherine, her husband, and their children, felt the need to flee England so that they could join other Marian exiles on the continent. Elizabeth would write to Catherine at this time. She signed her letter Cor Rotto, which roughly translates to broken heart. By the June of 1557, Catherine's family were in Frankfurt. A little over a year later, Elizabeth, being at Hatfield, on the 17th of November 1558, learned that her sister Mary I had died. Elizabeth was now Queen of England. We don't have an exact date for the return of Catherine and her family to England, but we are certainly talking weeks rather than months, because by January 1559, Catherine had been made one of the 4 wage ladies of Elizabeth's bedchamber, and from that moment, Catherine was rarely, seemingly, far from Elizabeth's side. The bedchamber was the most intimate sphere of the Tudor court, and it was also, arguably, one of the most demanding. Elizabeth, like other monarchs, would be accompanied and attended at every moment. The ladies of her bedchamber dressed her, they travelled with her, and they absorbed the full force of her moods. In spite of Elizabeth's earlier handwritten professions of heartbroken affection for Catherine, it was reported that during her time serving Queen Elizabeth, Catherine would, quote, often weep for unkindness. Nevertheless, as capricious as this queen could be, Catherine stayed ever at her side. And of course there would be benefits. Proximity to power, to monarchy, to the Queen, brought with it various rewards. For example, Catherine's daughter Lettice Knollys obtained a place in the royal household, while Catherine's son's wedding in 1565 would be celebrated with a tournament at the court. And all of this was a clear and public display of the royal esteem in which it seems this entire family was being held. Then, at the end of 1568, Catherine fell ill with what's described as a fever. Her husband was far away from her. He was at Bolton Castle because he'd been trusted with supervising the captivity of Mary Queen of Scots. He begged to return to see his wife, but his pleas in this regard were refused. He wrote a letter to his wife Catherine that's dated to the 30th of December 1568. In it, he explained, quote, Mr. Secretary, meaning William Cecil, informed me of your late sickness, wherewith I was the more disquieted, because I feared that Her Majesty's ungrateful denial of my coming to the court this Christmas had been some provocation to your sickness. William Cecil had assured Francis that his wife Catherine was recovering. She was not. On the 15th of January 1569, Katherine Carey died at Hampton Court Palace. She was in her mid-40s. During this final illness, she was reportedly, quote, very often visited by Her Majesty's own comfortable presence. After Catherine's death, Elizabeth was seemingly bereft. It was said that she became, quote, forgetful of her own health. Catherine was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, and it's interesting to me because Elizabeth spent lavishly on Catherine's funeral, and we have got an amount, £640, 2 shillings and 11 pence. And why this is interesting is because there's no indication that Elizabeth went to anywhere near these lengths, this expense, for her other cousins. And so, could this perhaps be an indication that Elizabeth knew that Catherine was closer to her than merely a cousin, that she was really a half-sister? Perhaps it's simply a sign of the emotional closeness of their relationship. Or maybe it's even an indication of the guilt that she felt at having kept Catherine from her husband in those last weeks and months, perhaps even a fear that she might have overworked her and brought on her sickness. Let me know what you think of this. Catherine's brother Henry would outlive her by the better part of 3 decades. Henry Cary was born on the 4th of March 1526. William Carey, the man acknowledged as his father, would die a little over 2 years after his birth, and at this point, little Henry inherited William's lands in Essex, Hampshire, Wiltshire, and Buckinghamshire. Henry Cary was a member of the royal household by 1545, and in that same year he married Anne Morgan. This couple had 10 children. Henry served in France, sat in Parliament, and also became a member of the Privy Chamber. Unlike his sister Catherine, Henry chose to stay in England during the reign of the Roman Catholic Queen Mary I. He served as a gentleman of the household for his cousin and possible half-sister, Elizabeth. In 1557, Henry was briefly imprisoned in the Fleet for debts he had incurred some years earlier. Soon, though, any financial issues would seem to be a distant memory. Henry's fortunes changed dramatically when Elizabeth became queen. Henry Carey was knighted almost immediately and raised up to the peerage as Baron Hunsdon on the 13th of January 1559. At that moment, he received lands worth £4,000 a year, which included the manor of Hunsdon. Henry served his cousin and potential half-sister, the Queen, in various ways. It's evident that he had a particular aptitude for martial pursuits, and he displayed his skills on both the battlefield and the tournament ground in ways that could only have been a credit to his queen. He joined the forces that were seeking to push the French out of Scotland in 1560, and soon after he returned to court following this mission, he was promptly made Master of the Queen's Hawks. This was a role that came with a salary of £40 a year. In 1561, he was made a Knight of the Garter, and I have got a video on this chivalric order that I will leave linked. He was entrusted with diplomatic missions, such as presenting the Order of the Garter to Charles IX in 1564, and in that same year, he was also made captain of the Gentlemen Pensioners. This was a group of elite bodyguards who served in the closest proximity to the monarch. In 1568, in the aftermath of Mary Queen of Scots fleeing into England, understandably, I think, this made Anglo-Scottish relations, which had been a source of tension for centuries, a still more delicate issue to navigate. I think it's telling that Elizabeth entrusted Henry with the role of Governor of Berwick, because this was a crucial post on the Scottish border. It's a sign, I think, of just how much he trusted him. When the rebellion of the Northern Earls in the name of their Roman Catholic faith broke out in 1569, Henry was away from this post. Nevertheless, upon learning of the uprising, he rushed back to join the Earl of Sussex, who was the Lord President of the Queen's Council in the north. And although he was outnumbered, Henry was able to lead a military victory that ultimately scattered the last of these rebels. Queen Elizabeth was understandably overjoyed with gratitude. A letter of praise in the Queen's name that was written by William Cecil was promptly sent off to him. But to this letter, Elizabeth added her own postscript, in her own hand, that reads as follows, quote, "I doubt much, my Harry, whether that the victory given me more joyed me, or that you were by God appointed the instrument of my glory. And I assure you, for my country's good, the first might suffice. But for my heart's contentation, the second more pleaseth me. It likes me not a little, that with a good testimony of your faith there is seen a stout courage of your mind, that more trusted to the goodness of your quarrel than to the weakness of your number. Well, I can say no more." And then she offers the following in Latin, which translates to, "Blessed is that servant whom when the Lord comes, he will find doing his, the Lord's, commands or will." She continues, "And that you may not think you have done nothing for your profit, though you have done much for your honour, I intend to make this journey somewhat to increase your livelihood, that you may not say to yourself," and again she writes a phrase in Latin which translates roughly as follows, "What is sacred is lost to the ungrateful." She signs off, "Your loving kinswoman, Elizabeth Regina." What do you think it means that in this moment of extraordinary gratitude, Elizabeth is highlighting their familial bond, their kinship? Wallace T. McCaffrey attests that Henry, quote, declared that this letter comforted him more than a £500 land grant. Henry continued to serve his queen's interests at her northern border, and soon his responsibilities would expand in the October of 1571, because at that point he was made Warden of the East Marches. He was soon negotiating with Scottish regents and threatening force when diplomacy failed. He would repeatedly urge Elizabeth to intervene in matters more decisively, and he was often frustrated by Elizabeth's apparent reluctance to act. He believed firmly that his queen underestimated the dangers in Scotland. He believed that she was wasting money on unreliable allies, and he also believed, I think pretty fairly, that he was rarely being given the resources he needed to do the best job possible. Henry argued staunchly, perhaps to some people's minds even abrasively, for his proposed courses of action. And it does even appear that there were some times where he suggested that that action should be taken without, or perhaps if we're being fair, before the Queen's ultimate approval had been received, which does perhaps sound like his loyalty might be questionable. Nevertheless, I firmly believe that everything he did was in the service of his country, and specifically in the service of his Queen. To my mind, his enduring loyalty to her is what is evident. In 1577, Henry is rewarded by being made a Privy Councillor. This role then becomes the focus of his career from then on out. There would, though, be developments that would require his attention and, in some cases, his presence in the north. Henry Cary would become the Crown's leading expert on Scottish affairs. He corresponded directly with James VI, and he managed English agents at the Scottish court. On top of all of this, he still remained in the role of captain of the Gentlemen Pensioners, as well as holding other high-profile positions, all of which served to further indicate the place of high esteem that he occupied. Among other roles, he was made Lord Lieutenant of Norfolk and Suffolk in 1588, so if you're keeping track, that is the year of the Spanish Armada, and in this role, he was required to oversee the musters of troops and supplies. In the following year, 1589, he became Chief Justice in the Eyre south of Trent. He was made Recorder of Cambridge and High Steward of Oxford from 1590 and 1592, respectively. However, I would say he is perhaps most famously connected with another role, and this one he obtained earlier than the ones we've just spoken about, because this one he received in 1585. In that year, he was made Lord Chamberlain. This was one of the most powerful positions in the realm. In it, he was responsible for lots of things. He was responsible for the royal household. He also had oversight of the Office of the Revels, and they are the ones who censor plays. He also was able to decide who was granted audiences with the Queen, and on top of all of this, he was also tasked with managing court ceremonies and providing entertainments. In looking to find those entertainments, Henry was well placed to become a patron of the theatre. Those who found favour with him would surely benefit from his control not only of court entertainment, but also play censorship. His troupe of players were known as the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and they would later become, in James's reign, the King's Men. And this was William Shakespeare's company. Through Henry's patronage, this company were able to profit by performing before the court. And this connection was even more beneficial during the periods when plague forced the playhouses to close. In those moments, they might hope for, and indeed did receive, invitations to follow the court and to entertain them in the lavish halls of their palaces and castles. Henry Cary's rank and position was also valuable, because that gave his players some protection from the increasing interference of the civic authorities of London. It was able to see them off in many cases. Henry Cary, Baron Hunsdon, died on the 23rd of July 1596 at the age of 70. He had continued his habit of dedicated royal service until almost the end. Indeed, he would make his last appearance at the Privy Council around a month before his death. And like his sister Katherine, he would be buried in Westminster Abbey, and also like her, his funeral was paid for by his Queen. I do think it's possible that Henry's years of loyal service and attendance on Elizabeth were driven, at least in part, by genuine affection for her as a member of his family, however close family she actually was in reality. And certainly, Henry is someone who allows himself to be expressive regarding his feelings about family. I mean, take, for example, the way he speaks about his son, who was also his heir and the executor of his will. He was George Carey. Henry's last illness, which led to his death, seems to have been pretty sudden, and so he was left to make his last wishes known orally. He finished giving his will by telling George, quote, "I've always found you a kind and loving son." And this is what is recorded as the final line of what was effectively his last will and testament. McCaffrey writes that Henry, quote, "stood out in the estimate of his contemporaries by his plain speaking, forthrightness, and lack of guile. In lots of ways, Katherine and Henry Carey lived pretty different lives. Katherine is serving the Queen in her most intimate circle. In her most private rooms, she is one of her chief secret keepers, residing at the very heart of the royal court, while Henry's service is more public-facing. His takes place outside the privy apartments, in Elizabeth's council and on her battlefields. Of course, they both also had many things that tied them together, experiences they shared. Perhaps chief amongst them was the fact that although they were unequivocally both the children of Mary Boleyn, one, or perhaps both of them, might also have been the children of King Henry VIII. And this was certainly something that would have been discussed, gossiped about, rumoured over. I think it's unlikely that Katherine and Henry would have been totally unaware of these questions. And so one has to wonder what it means to grow up at a court questioning your parentage in that way, wondering whether you are the child of a king, hearing other people wonder the same. In either case, whether or not they were her siblings, they were certainly Queen Elizabeth's kin, and her favoured kin at that. It's evident to me that they were both bound to her by loyalty, affection, and as we've seen, a lifetime of service. But what do you think of these Carey siblings, of their service, of their relationships with Queen Elizabeth I? Please do add your thoughts on this in the comments. And as for an emoji or a social glyph for this episode, I'm thinking there's a variety we could do. Something royal, like a crown or a queen, maybe something palace or castle based, or perhaps something battle themed. Whatever you are going to pick, please do help me to keep the algorithm pixies happy by writing to let me know why you've picked the emoji that you have. Don't forget to check out the description box underneath this video, because that's going to have links to all the other places you can find me on the internet. That's where you can come and chat to me. We can start some other conversations. You can suggest other video topics you'd like to see. Also, on screen now, lots of buttons reminding you to press them. There is going to be the like, the subscribe, and the bell icon. Once you hit the bell, also hit all. That should let you know when I'm going to be uploading and going live. Also, please do click on the hype button. I need to put that on screen soon too, because that does help the video as well. Now, as we know, YouTube doesn't always tell you when I am going live, or indeed when I am uploading. It's a bit tricksy in that way. So if you want a failsafe to be notified about my content, please head over to my website. It will be linked. It is www.katrinamarchant.com. And then if you head over to the contact page, you will see this box. Please put your email address in that box and then hit sign up. That will add you to my list. So I can send you out a weekly email to let you know what I've been up to, but also so I can tell you where you can find my content, hopefully with some useful links. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.